From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, everybody. It's very nice to see all of you here ready for this concert. My name is David Plyler. I'm in the music division, and I have the great honor and pleasure to have three amazing musicians up here with me. At the end, we have Eliot Fisk, who you will hear on guitar, Irvine Arditti, founder and patriarch, I guess, of the Arditti Quartet, and Hilda Paredes, whose work we will hear premiered this evening. So welcome. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
At the very outset, before we get started, I want to thank the Mexican Cultural Institute of the Embassy of Mexico for their support in helping to bring Hilda here today so that she could speak with us and experience the performance as well. I thought with these, there's such a variety of music on this program. I thought we could just say a few words about each piece and kind of go from there and see where the conversation takes us. So I thought maybe the place to start would be the Berio. There will be an admission of sorts of a fault of mine with this piece, but
it's not your fault. It's just some. You know, it's always interesting when things that you've lived become lines in some kind of an encyclopedia or somebody's treatise or somebody's PhD dissertation or whatever. You know, and you remember how you lived it, and then you see how the musicological mind deals with what you lived and what you experienced as music. And sometimes it's quite brilliant what they have to say, and sometimes they just get it a little wrong. I think in this case, it's curious that in my experience, what the man wrote was incorrect.
So what I'm just going to point out, and I like to, if I'm wrong about something, I want to put it out there right away. There's in your notes, it's since been updated, by the way, on the digital version. In your notes, there is a mistake about one of the things that Eliot Fisk supposedly said to Berio, and I made the incorrect approach of going with the secondary source when the primary source is right there. So this is a teachable moment with research. So be aware. So
it's really just.
What are you talking about?
Well, let's. So about almost 30 years ago, I met Berio in his villa in Radicondoli, the famous place where he wrote a lot of his music and where he retreated from the world and just holed up and wrote things and had wonderful big dinner banquets and things with lots of people, and it was a wonderful place. Basically, it was similar to Stockhausen. If you want to write these people, you write Maestro Luciano Berio, Radicondoli, Italia, vicino Siena. So you write, Radicondoli is the name of the town, Italia, that's Italy, near to Siena. That's the address. Like Stockhausen used to be Stockhausen-Kürten, whatever the Postleitzahl was, right? It was Stockhausen-Kürten. So, that's all you need for to get to these people. Anyway.
It's not good if you live in London.
Then you just write Irvine Arditti, it gets there. Anyway, so as we worked towards the creation of the sequenza, it's perhaps not a typical process because these sequenzas were written really almost as, at least in my case, almost as a kind of a portrait of the lunacy of the person for which the piece was written. And I remember when I got the first draft of it, and he writes, "Eccola la maledetta, here it is, the cursed one. It will make you despair as it has made me despair." Anyway, so he wrote, as you'll hear, there's a short, quiet introduction, which was actually added later at breakfast one morning. But the short introduction was added later. But the piece originally started with just like 2 chords and an explosion. Later, he had a little bit of an intro to make the explosion come a little bit later. But anyway, he figured that after about 12 minutes of just going crazy on the instrument, that the instrument would be out of tune, which was a logical assumption. But in fact, it really didn't get out of tune most of the time. And so there's this optional place about 10 pages in where if you want, you can tune the instrument. And you'll hear this sort of the place where things relax for a while. And you can tune the instrument. Well, tonight, since the second piece has got all kinds of scordatura, meaning changed Maestra Paredes' piece has lots of changing of the tuning of the instrument. So maybe tonight it'll be the one night I have to tune, but I generally don't tune. And it was not me that said anything about having to tune. That was Berio's idea. So that's the slight incorrection.
So the reason I bring this up, beyond it just being kind of interesting in itself, is that the interactions between composers when they're able to work with the instrumentalists who are performing their works is really, it plays a great role in the creation of these pieces. And so for all of the pieces, I believe tonight, there was some aspect of this where the performers were able to work with the composers, not with the Lachenmann, or?
You said everything.
Oh, okay. So in any case, it's just one of those important things that, one other thing I'd like to say, or have you speak about with the Sequenza, you mentioned earlier today that in many ways these are like portraits. It's not so much about any particular theoretical or technical aspect, but it's more portraits of performers and things. So this aspect of performer, composer, kind of struck you as that was being an important.
Yeah, I don't want to overemphasize my personal importance. Of course, there are all kinds of musical structures that are being worked out, and Berio is composing out the musical DNA really of a certain chord that's in the piece, and that's what the great composers do. They compose out the musical. They establish a musical DNA, and they compose out some of the many ways that DNA might be developed as it goes through life, so to speak. And that's really more important than my persona as far as the piece. Much more importance. It just so happened I had the privilege to work with Maestro Berio on this piece, and we did have a lot of back and forth. There were a lot of little, he really knew the instrument very well, and actually, showed me, as Maestra Paredes actually has given me a very profound education about my instrument. She found all these things I thought were completely impossible. I still think they're impossible, but she's actually right. I just have to work harder. So this is a great thing when you work with a superior musical mind that doesn't necessarily play your instrument. They don't tend to have a lot of pity on you, but this is good because it forces you to grow and to expand your horizon and to amplify your consciousness. And this is why we're grateful, and especially tonight to have the honor of Maestro here with us is terrific. So.
Well, writing for guitar, if you're a non-guitarist, I think it's one of those tricky things for composers in general. But you've written a lot of pieces that involve guitar or pluck strings and things like that. Maybe you can tell us a bit about this new piece.
The guitar is a big challenge, yes, if you're not a guitarist yourself. But then I don't play violin, I don't play viola, I don't play cello, and just as you mentioned before, working. It is as important for a composer to work with players as it is for players to work for composers. And we develop all sorts of ways of understanding the instrument. And in my case, I try to write very idiomatically and to discover, to draw the music out of the instrument, but also to try to find, you see, the more I write music, the more I discover that music has its own intelligence. And the less I have to make decisions, the more the process of creation is for me a process of discovery and a process that sometimes is very surprising. So I will mention the scordatura because this has been an issue that we have been discussing and because you mentioned it.
That's why I'm sitting between them.
Yes. The guitar is tuned, the strings of the guitar are tuned to a way of thinking which is very tonal, very much part of a harmony that belongs to a certain period in the history of music. And for me, the difference between the guitar and the bowed instruments in a string quartet is precisely that it's a lot easier to change the tuning. I'd never like to change the tuning of the bowed instruments because it creates all sorts of practical problems to get the pieces.
There's no problem at all when you retune 3 strings of the guitar. It's very, very easy.
Well, perhaps you have to think differently, but but the guitar can take it more easily. Yeah. And this, for me, creates a whole different range of harmonic possibilities.
Yeah, this is for sure. It is amazing.
And this is for me the source. All the harmonic structure of the piece is in the hands of the guitar, in the way the guitar is tuned differently in this piece. Yeah. So
does the tunings stay? Does it change during the course of the piece?
No,
No.
it does.
No.
at least that. But
it's the next piece.
but basically, if you imagine that, since the sixth string is in E flat, the fourth string is in D flat, and the second string is in B flat. So every other string is basically has all the notes shifted 1 inch, or in the case of the D flat, it's even stranger because it's a third. So I know about 10 scordaturas on the guitar, or something like this. A lot of scordaturas. I know E flat in the sixth string. There's one piece by Takemitsu that uses the B flat in the second string, and I don't know of any piece except for, I think Hilda has another piece that has an even weirder scordatura. Yeah. But aside from that, I'm not aware. You know, we don't grow up with these scordaturas. I grew up with about 10 scordaturas, but not this one. So it really is a mental gymnastics because she's calling for lightning quick reaction. This repertoire that the Arditti plays requires a kind of virtuosity. I mean, I try to explain to them that they are really a more highly evolved form of human being. It's like I'm a Neanderthal and they are Homo sapiens, and they have to try to bring me along, you know. And I'm not anywhere near their level, but they have been so gracious to me and have been so kind to me, and allowing me to sort of stumble along and try to enter their wonderful universe.
What shall I say now? No, he's great. It's just we're slightly more experienced playing this sort of music than he is. But I think that's why you wanted to do it, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's like jumping out of a plane the first time, I guess. You know, but not sure that the parachute was going to open. You know, so.
Well, maybe could you tell us a bit more about the origins of the piece? I know that the name has rather multiple meanings. That
yes. Well, it has son. The word "son" can mean they are, or it can mean son. It's a musical form, a popular musical form in
Veracruz. Veracruzana.
Yeah, in Mexico. It's a musical form. The piece has nothing to do with traditional popular Mexican music. And the second part of the title, dementes cuerdas, can mean they are demential strings, or it can mean son, the musical form of demential strings, or it can also mean they are of sound mind. If you divide the word demente cuerda, means it can also mean they are of sound mind. So it has multiple meanings, and for me this opens up a whole idea of the kind of liquidity of the music. Music doesn't have a meaning as such, or it has so many meanings. It has as many meanings as ears or open ears are out there to listen to it and to allow the music to get inside them. So for me, this is very an appropriate title. It also makes reference, of course, to the multiple techniques that I use in the piece, particularly in the string quartet. You can hear and see the players do things that are not very conventional.
You know, there are moments in the piece, and I've only been able to listen through it completely just the once, but there are moments where it feels like it's almost turned into a I guess would it be 22-string guitar or something like that, where it really it has that effect. I mean, of course, there's other places where I don't want to say there's tension between them, but where it's more distinctive. But there really are these really, especially beautiful moments when some of the harmonics kind of pop out that are really something. And then also these
well,
mega guitar.
Well, it is many strings there, so you can. I play in the piece. There's in the middle section. There's a very expressive solo for the guitar, and the string quartet only shadows the harmonies. And there's moments, as you say, that the whole ensemble becomes a mega instrument. Yeah.
Well, it's a very beautiful piece, and we're looking forward to it. Is this? I know this is just the premiere, but do you have plans to record it, or?
Hopefully, we haven't discussed that.
We need to perform it first.
Oh, come on. You're a master of plucking.
He's also got a lot of courage.
You can pluck much better than we can. So we learn a lot from his plucking and dexterity on the guitar.
Well, Eliot, you're welcome to stay with us, but I know you also wanted to...
Yeah, I think I will just say see you out there. And thank you so much for coming. And so happy that the Library of Congress could be really the spark plug for this wonderful project, which has been just great to be part of. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the tour, which starts right here. So thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we could speak a bit more about the rest of the program. There's, as we mentioned at the very beginning, there's a wide variety of music. So each piece is, represents something that's quite different. The piece that I have not heard at all is the Manoury, but you have played all four of his, or at least all four of the ones that he didn't disavow.
No, that's not true, actually.
Oh.
I read your program notes, which are quite extensive. I mean, there's nothing much more I can say about the piece. It's all written in the program now. But the very early quartet, we have a strange relationship with Philippe Manoury, because most composers we work with, and they write us a quartet, or whatever the piece is, and then some years later they usually write another piece, and there's, before you know where you are, there's a whole repertoire of string quartets, usually from composers. With Philippe, we played the early quartet, which is mentioned in the program. We played it in a festival, I think in the 80s.
70?
Was it 70s?
He said, well, he said it was composed in 78, so...
Okay, so yeah, it was soon after then. I don't remember exactly when we played it, maybe in the early 80s. And I was not particularly fond of the piece. But we played it a few times, half a dozen times. And then we lost touch. We didn't ask him for another quartet. And there were two French composers together we played at that concert. One was Pascal Dussapin, and the other one was Philippe Manoury. I mention that because the last time we were here, we played for the Phillips collection, and we played quartet of Pascal Dussapin. So we met these two composers when they were young, and with Dussapin we continued the relationship, and he wrote almost all his quartets following that very first one that we played in this concert. With Philippe Manoury, we had stopped having contact until quite a few years later. And I think at the end of the 20th century, when he wrote his string quartet called Stringendo. And then he decided at some point that the early quartet was not to be played anymore. And I think in between I'd asked him for a quartet, and he got really upset because he wanted us to play the early one more. And he said, "I've written you one, you don't play it." So there were quite a lot of years that went by, early 80s till, I don't remember exactly when the Donna...
It was 2010 was when...
Was it 2010? Okay, so that's a hell of a lot of years. So he wrote, then he decided that, okay, Irvine doesn't particularly like the first quartet. Perhaps I'll withdraw it. I don't particularly like it either. I must say, by this time, I'm beginning to quite like it again. But I do love to be obtuse, especially with composers. But then he wrote Stringendo. Then he wrote another piece with electronics, not for us, for a French quartet. And then he wrote
Melancholia.
Melancholia, which is a very challenging piece. It's like 45 minutes long, and we have to play crotales as well as our instruments. And sometimes there's crotales, bells. And sometimes we have a mallet, but sometimes there's no time to pick up the mallet. So you have to hit the crotales with the point of the bow, the pin of the bow. It's very challenging. I don't know if they've got any good bows here, but I was thinking of asking them if I could borrow one and we could actually play it next time.
We actually have a few tort bows over there, but I don't think
no tuits.
Yeah, no.
No tuits to go.
No,
with
we do. I
Strat.
think we do actually.
You do, yeah. Okay, well, I wouldn't really ask that. And then recently, Stringendo arrived a couple of years ago, and it's probably the most concise of the pieces, the piece we'll play tonight. And I like Philip's writing because it almost goes back to the past. It's not a minimalism. It doesn't get up to the antics that the last piece we'll play, Lachenmann does. It's actually going back to playing the instrument as I was taught to play it many years ago, which is sometimes quite refreshing from composers because we play all sorts of different music and are well known for getting up to all sorts of things. And so in actual fact now Philippe Manoury has written a whole gamut of string quartets for us, and we continued the relationship after a long pause. And going back to the joke of the first quartet, we played the other quartets in a festival in England, and we wanted to play something from him. This was in our 40th anniversary 3 years ago. And the only piece that fitted was the early quartet. So I had to phone him up and say, Philip, do you mind if we play that early quartet that you said was withdrawn? And he said, okay, Irvine, you can play it, but once. So we played it a few years ago.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, something that you said struck me as a bit unfair for a composer to complain about, which is that, you know, why haven't you been playing my piece in the meantime? Because you play so many new pieces that are written for you or just are part of the literature. One thing that, you know, I think that at least I have as a question, and I'm sure other people do as well, how do you manage to, there are such diverse types of pieces that require so much thought and care to put together. How do you go about this process of planning programming? Do you do this years in advance? Do you have just a rigorous rehearsal schedule that allows you to accomplish these things?
What would you like to hear tomorrow?
I
mean, there's a core nucleus of pieces that we can play almost without any rehearsal because we play them so often. And that's great because I think you have to be quick learning contemporary music. If you take a long time doing it, you'll never get very far. I mean, you have to access the pieces quite quickly to know what they're all about. And we do quite a lot of work before we meet. We take the parts and the score and we put lots of markings in so that before the first rehearsal, we know exactly what our colleagues are playing. And so it minimalizes the rehearsal time. It's like being a conductor, each being a conductor and studying the score so you know what each instrument is supposed to do. So your part in a quartet, your part in relation to the others. And then I think the learning process becomes quite quick. Obviously the piece develops. If you're playing a piece for the first time, it's not going to be the same as if you're playing it for the 10th time. I think we played Philippe Manoury's piece now 8 or 10 times. We played Grido more than 100 times.
Oh, wow.
And that's quite a lot, considering that with a lot of pieces we've played, not many other quartets play those pieces. But with Grido, there are at least 9 or 10 quartets that play that piece. And considering, the techniques involved with Lachenmann's music, that's changed over the past 10 or 15 years.
Sure. Well, before we get to the Lachenmann, I do want to speak about that a little bit. Hilda, I was wondering maybe you could speak about your experience of writing for the Arditti Quartet, because you've done that for other pieces as well. And is it always a case where it's everything's perfect right off the bat, or do you get a lot of feedback, or what's the interaction like?
Well, for me, it's probably the biggest challenge, I have to say. And I have written orchestral music. I have written operas. I'm working on a new opera now. But for me, the biggest challenge is the string quartet for these guys. Why? Because I know the experience they have. I know the stature of these musicians, and because I know almost all the composers they have worked with, and many of them are people that I highly respect. And so, and it's also a medium that you cannot hide as a composer. You cannot just sort of use the orchestra to hide behind a big noise or something. Sure. I mean, everything you write comes through. So yes, for me, it's the biggest challenge. So also because I set myself very high standards when I write for them. And from the very first quartet I wrote for them in '98, this quartet, I had to make a decision then whether I would just write a string quartet or whether I would write a piece for the Arditti Quartet. And I chose the second. And I think it was a wise choice because having made that decision, I grew as a composer. Because I was able to challenge myself, and I knew that anything I would write, they would be able to play it. And that has a double edge. Yes. So the second time I wrote for them, I wanted the same experience. I wanted to grow even more. And in my third quartet, it was just a more intimate piece, a tribute to this journey of 20 years with whom we shared. And
I have to tell you, Hilda is my wife. If you don't know that. And that's why she's seen all the composers come into our house and rehearse with us. And that's why she lives with lots of string quartets being played, and she's on another floor trying to write music.
Yeah, so that's
yeah, that's okay.
Put you off track.
Yeah.
Well, that's always it's always interesting to hear about these different types of interactions, because I think for most people it's a unknowable type of thing if they don't compose. Although if you don't, you should compose. It's always, everybody should compose, I think. Going back to the Lachenmann, which is on the second half, I'm wondering if you could say a few words about its origin and working with Lachenmann, what that was like. Because I know one of the things that you'd mentioned some of the different techniques, especially for some of the earlier quartets. Part of it is almost seems like there needs to be a demonstration or something like that in order to really understand it. I don't know if you found that to be the case. Or.
Well, we've had a long relationship. I have, and the quartet, various different members of the quartet, with Lachenmann. I like having relationships with composers.
Right thing to say.
But this is a different sort of relationship. But going back to Helmut, I think we first played his music in '85. And we weren't very successful. We played the first quartet, Grand Torso. It's a complicated piece. There's a lot of theater motions in it, playing on the body of the instrument, doing all sorts of things. It's rather against music. It was like a protest at the time. And we weren't terribly good at doing that sort of thing. We started off playing difficult music, normal, complex music. Found we could do it quite well, but we weren't very good at making noises. And it's very funny because I think Helmut says he asked the promoter to have his cost of travel coming from Germany to London after the concert, so he could work with us more on the piece. And I didn't know this until quite recently. But Helmut came and he stayed, and I think once he stayed for a week, we played all his pieces. There's a great piece called Tanzsuite for quartet and orchestra, which we've done many times. And after Grand Torso, both of the next quartets were written for us, Reichenselige Geister and Grido, which we played tonight. And so we really had a great relationship with him. I think you have to know composers. You have to understand them as well as understanding their music. I mean, I started playing contemporary music when I was very young. I knew Ligeti, I knew everybody. I knew Carter, I knew Cage. And if you have some knowledge of the way people react, you have meals with them, or they come and stay with you to rehearse. I knew Xenakis very well. I feel qualified as a kind of link to play their music because I understood exactly what they wanted. And of course there are hundreds of other composers, less well-known people also, of a tradition that one can pass down. But Helmut's a very special character because he works out all his techniques. He can actually do them himself, even though he can't really play the instruments. And all the techniques that he asks for, he can demonstrate. And I love getting him to demonstrate things because he holds the instrument in a very odd way, the violin and the bow, but the way he holds it is the most perfect way to realize what he's written. And so you, just by looking at what he does, and sometimes we have fun in workshops. I give him my violin, and I just watch him again, see what he does, and how easily he gets these sounds. And of course, you're not taught. You naturally, as a violinist or a string player, you don't hold the instrument in that way. And I remember the reason we were unsuccessful in the beginning was because all these weird ways he told us to hold the bow, in the panic of the concert, you just forget them. And you go back to what you normally know. And it takes a while. It takes a few concerts of playing this music to understand exactly what you have to do. And for some of the rehearsals we had with him, we'd work independently 1.5 days, each player. And the important thing was to learn the techniques. The rehearsing of the pieces we could do in a way without him. But to understand from the beginning what we had to do was the most important thing. And if you really understand from the beginning, you rehearse right. So many people do not do their homework at the beginning and rehearse wrong. And then they perfect wrong. And then they're very good at playing it wrong. And then they find it very difficult to play it right when somebody says, no, you have to do it like this. And so that's why from the very beginnings of the Arditti Quartet, I realized the importance of actually working with composers, rehearsing pieces with the composers fairly early on in the relationship between you and the piece, even perhaps before you can play it properly, just to find out what they want, so you can point your interpretation in the right direction. And for me, that's one of the most fascinating things about playing contemporary music. Something you can't do with classical composers, of course. You can't phone them up or email them, but this is all the other things that you can do these days.
Right, too many. Yeah. Well, you know, another thing that I think that's interesting to maybe say about that is that you're, in essence, you're kind of establishing a performance practice that can then, so that it almost seems like a master-apprentice relationship in terms of how that type of knowledge gets passed on, because it's not always so easy to, I think, glean from just a recording or just the score as it is with that one-on-one interaction.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great responsibility of what we do, being the bearers of the sound of so many pieces for the first time. That's a huge responsibility. I remember thinking about that, or rather trying not to think about it in the early days. We do concerts at important music festivals, and the things would be broadcast live. Today they're often streamed too. They'd make recordings, they'd issue them on documentary CDs from the festival, and you knew there was no place to try out these pieces. You couldn't try out them in some not important venue first. You had to get it right the first time. And this is a great responsibility, and it's something you have to take seriously. So it means you work very quickly and very accurately towards your end goal.
Well, I have a question for both of you about maybe I thought if you could say a few words. You mentioned an opera earlier. I don't know if you could say anything about that yet, or maybe just speak about some of your upcoming projects.
Yes, I'm just starting writing a monodrama, an opera project based on a very important American person from the 19th century, Harriet Tubman, And it's been the most incredible journey so far, the past 18 months, the research process. I was very ignorant about about Harriet Tubman and this period in the history of North America. And so I'm very grateful to the African-American soprano, Clarence McFadden, for introducing, and I'm writing the piece for her, for introducing me to her, and hopefully it's already a wonderful journey, and hopefully it will continue to be one. The piece is programmed for the autumn of 2018, and it's actually a commission from a Mexican festival. And the piece, I'm sure we will eventually bring it to the US. I'm not so sure what the plans are, but it's a co-production with Music Theatre Transparent in Belgium. Clarence McFadden lives in the Netherlands, so that's the connection. And we are hoping to tour the piece quite widely.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
And what about the Arditti Quartet?
Oh, don't ask me that. What we're doing tomorrow. I'm thinking about what we're doing today.
Sure. Well, maybe, well, you're probably just doing a lot of new pieces, and we'll get to hear. I mean, we've all been the beneficiaries.
It's
of
French, yes. This spring is French, yeah. Both two other composers. One who we have had a relationship, Hugues Dufour, has just written his third quartet for us, which we will play in a few months' time. And another one, Philippe Hurel, who we have never, I don't think he's written a string quartet. What key is your suite in?
Oh, no.
I don't think he's written any quartets, but he's just also written a piece for us.
Oh, fantastic.
So we've got two new pieces from French composers. Completely coincidental that they arrived. One is being premiered in Vienna, and I think the other one in Germany in the Witten New Music Days.
Oh, great.
In two months' time.
Well, I thought maybe at this point we could open it up if there are any questions in the audience. What I'll ask you to do is Jay will come around with a microphone just so everybody can hear the question and we can keep on the recording.
Hi. Question for you, Hilda. It's still very rare, at least in America, to have a classical music composer who is a woman. And just wondered how you got started, how you were interested in beginning to compose, sort of your progress along the way there. And for you, I was asking, a lot of people written for you, for your quartet. Are there any, this is politically incorrect, but are there anybody who's avidly wanting to write for you that you're not interested in? You don't have to name names. Does that ever come up?
Who do you want to answer first?
I think things have changed enormously from the time when I started. As a young woman, I was always the only lady in the class. And this has changed more and more. There was some years ago where the girls outnumbered the boys. So, and I feel there are now wonderful lady composers, a lot of my colleagues whom I respect enormously, and some here in this country also. And we're all very different. And we all have unique voices. And I find often the music as inspiring as that of my male colleagues, which wasn't the case when I started as a student. I think we still have a long way to go because there's some environments sometimes that don't feature lady composers as much as they should, or they feature them too much to make a point that it has to be women composers, as if we are blind autistic nuns or something like that, you know. So hopefully there will not be a need to have festivals of women musicians one day.
I must say that in the Arditti Quartet's repertoire we have quite a lot of women composers. and new people, young people also. There's a woman composer writing a piece later on in the year for Festival d'Automne. Probably never heard of her, but her name's Clara Inota. She's probably in her early 30s. I mean, there are lots. There's a huge amount of female composers on our repertoire list. So, I mean, I think what you're saying was true a long time ago, but it's not really true anymore. Not at least in Europe. I don't know if it's true in the States. I doubt it. Do people I don't like want to write pieces? It's more people that nobody knows who want to write pieces, who can't because nobody knows them. And if they're great and they send a marvelous score, which I try to look at all the scores that come in, then it might be possible. I think the people who I don't like know I don't like them. Or let's say that we are good at certain things and not so good at other things. And so everyone knows what sort of music we play. And I don't think those people want to write us pieces anyway. So it's the way it is. But it works. The system works. And I can even talk to the people I don't play. Another hand. Oh, sorry.
Hilda, could you share with us what does it mean to be a Mexican composer living in London, and what role does the Mexican musical tradition still has in your role as composer?
It's a big responsibility for me because since I was a student, I was very aware about the expectations that the music industry had from someone coming from where I come from. And it's still the case. You know, there's a lot of expectations just because I'm Mexican that I'm going to be writing unta kind or a song jarocho tonight or something like that. And I have been very, I dislike that extremely, extremely. I find it extremely patronizing. I think there is great ignorance about our history, about the incredible rich culture that we have. And it's that the European influence didn't finish. We are a mixed breed. And throughout the 20th century, there has been so much immigration from so many countries that have enriched our own culture and have enriched my music. So for me, it's a big responsibility because I feel I am writing Mexican music, but not the music that the industry of entertainment thinks Mexican music should be. Yes?
You have another question?
This is for Hilda as well, but it could be for both of you. In doing your research for your monodrama on Harriet Tubman, will you and your partner have time to go to the eastern shore of Maryland and see some of the places where she lived? I believe there's a new Harriet Tubman museum that just opened. And the other question is, I believe your first opera was a joint experimental theater piece based upon the experiences of immigrants, of migrants trying to cross between North and across the border, or am I? And are there any plans for that opera to be performed in London, Berlin, or Washington? Thank you.
I think the piece you mentioned, it was not my first opera. It's my most recent music theater piece. It's La Tierra de la Miel, which is part of a collaborative project, Cuatro Corridos, which was a collaboration with 3 other composers. It was 4 of us. And what ties the four pieces is the story of the Mexican writer Jorge Volpi. This links with the other question. I work a lot with, particularly with Mexican poets and Mexican writers. It was, the subject matter was a true story, and it's based on the human trafficking, the women that come from Tenancingo, they're brought into this country as prostitutes. And this was a story that hit the New York Times because it was the cartel that was bringing, the gang of people that were bringing these women were discovered by a Chicano policewoman, and they were brought to justice, and the whole thing was dismantled. So in a way, it's a happy ending, but we know that these things still happen.
Was it done on this coast? It was done first in San Diego.
It was done in San Diego, where the story took place. Yes, and it has toured a lot, the United States, and the CD is out there in Bridge Records also. This is like my most recent one. For some reason, a lot of my every project I do for the stage has a lot of political or social or gender connotations. And so the invitation to do something on Harriet Tubman was just the kind of thing that was made for me, because I really feel very strongly about these issues. I think they are not exclusive to this country, not exclusive to the problems with slavery and to African Americans. I think they're more universal and more humane. I wish the project had enough funds for me to travel to Maryland with my librettist and my stage director. We're really struggling to find the funds for this project, and it's a very small project. We'll have 3 instruments, electronics, 1 singer, and a girl, and that's it. So the stage director, yes, Matthew Luton is from Australia. My librettist is a Puerto Rican writer, Mayra Santos Febres, who is a specialist on slavery and all these subject matters. So we are communicating through Skype and FaceTime. Yeah.
I think we have time for just one more question, if there is one. All right, well, thank you so much. You're in for a real treat tonight. This is some really gorgeous music, and just exciting music too. So I'm really excited about it. And thank Irvine Arditti and Hilda Paredes for joining us for this talk.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.